Okay, let's start from the very beginning. We need to flash the Minimig AGA core to the Turbo Chameleon. Let's see what slots we have open. Go down to Launch Core and see what you currently have. In here, you're not going to want to flash anything except the Chameleon core, which is the Commodore core, to the first slot. You create some potential problems with that unless you're an advanced user. You're probably not going to want to do that. So find another one. You can find an empty slot or you can overwrite one. Here I'm going to go ahead and overwrite the ZX Spectrum. Now make note on the left hand side the slots are numbered with letters. So we're going to want to make note for what I'm doing here. I'm going to make note of B. You make note of what slot you want. That's going to be important here in a minute. Okay, we can back out of here. And let's go ahead, before we get over to the PC, and remove your SD card. SD card needs to be removed when you're flashing a core. Okay, and then plug in your USB cable from the PC into the slot. Okay, now let's go over to the PC. Just a real quick note here. I'm not your mother, so I'm not going to preach to you what to do. Just want to explain for myself. I own several copies of Amiga Forever, so I have access to licensed ROMs and licensed Amiga OS workbench images. Those will be what I'll be using here. You can find them elsewhere, but I think it's a good value, and you can find digital copies on sale, especially around holidays, really, really cheap. So to me, it's worth it. Anyhow, that's enough of that. Okay, to flash a core, you need two things. You need a tool, and then you need the core you're going to flash. So let's start by downloading the tool. Go to the wiki for Turbo Chameleon. As you see here, that's the official wiki. There's your link. And go down to Tools, and Chaco is the tool that you want. So click on that. And we're using Windows here, so we want to download Windows. So let's save somewhere we know we're going to go to. And let's put it, for me, I'm going to put it in downloads. I'm collecting files, my main download. And there it goes, it's downloading. Okay, then let's go over to retrorambling.net. This is the official core for Minimig AGA by Alistair. And if you remember, we've discussed version 1 or version 2. Like you see here, V1. I'm using a V1 at the moment. But if you had a version 2, you scroll down, you see here's the version for version 2. There's your V2. Don't mix these up. Make sure you get the right one. So going to download, point it to the same folder. And if it gives you a hard time, like it gives you a hard time right here, Windows doesn't recognize it. So go ahead and tell it to keep, and it will download. Okay, go to the folder that you saved it in. And I saved it in downloads. So let's go here in downloads. Okay, here we go. So let's go ahead and extract this. I've got WinRAR. You should be able to do it just with Windows itself. So it might look a little different here, but you can do the same thing. So yeah, let's go ahead and extract that. Okay, there's our tools, and let's go ahead and extract the actual core. Okay, and there's the actual core. So let's go into tools. Okay, go ahead and double click chaco.exe, and it should immediately see your Chameleon and say that it's running. And remember shortly ago when I told you that you need to know what slot you're going to be writing to, or should be flashing to. Well, here we go. So we do not want 0, which is slot A. for me here, we decided we wanted to go to slot B, which is also 1. So whatever one you determined and wrote down, that's where you need to make sure you have here. So let's go ahead and flash the .rbf. Now navigate to wherever you had downloaded that to and extracted. Go ahead and select the .rbf and open, and should be flashing. Doesn't take too long. I'll go ahead and leave this in for people who'd like to see the process. If you don't like the process, go ahead and skip ahead. And really that's it. Once that's done, we can go back over and I can show you that we now have the core. Almost. And we're done. Go ahead and close this, and I'll see you back over at the Turbo Chameleon. Okay, go ahead and power off your Turbo Chameleon, and you can unplug the USB for flashing. Go ahead and power back on. And let's go and make sure that the flash took go down to launch core. And there you go. We now have it flashed. We can move on to the next step. Okay, determine what SD card you're going to want to use. And here I went out and got a new SanDisk 64 gigabyte, which we'll use, and I will go and show you how to set this up the way I think is the most ideal. I recommend you use a 64 gigabyte SD card, which I am using here. You can use a different size, but you'd have to adjust how it's set up. And the way I'm setting up here is the way I'd like it. You know, there's a thousand ways to skin a cat, but this I'm just explaining how I'm doing it. Anyhow, insert your SD card and make sure that it's seen and mounted. Go ahead and search for CMD. We want to open command prompt, run as administrator. Type disk part. Type list disk. Our SD card here is disk 2, but you need to be really careful at this point because it could be different. It depends on how many hard drives or other devices you have. Make sure that it is your SD card. You do not want to do what I'm about to do with any of your main hard drives. You want to make absolutely sure that it is your SD card. So here I have my SD card is disk 2. Select disk 2. Now we want to let's do list disk one more time just to make sure. You see the little asterisk there, it's selected. So absolutely I have my SD card selected. Now curiosity, let's list partition. Yep, by default there's just one partition, but we want to make 2. Type clean disk. Excuse me, just clean. You can just cancel this. I don't use disk part every day, so, but it's like riding a bike. You get it back real quick. Okay, let's list partition or list part. There are no active partitions. So now you see the formatted size, even though it says it's 64 gigabyte, it only comes to a little under 60. So we're going to split that roughly in half. Let's create partition primary size equal, let's just do 30 gig. Let's list part. And there we go. Now let's create a second one, and we'll just let it take whatever's left of the size. It's not specified size. Now let's do list part. And there we go. Two roughly the same size, a little bit, but that takes up the entire size of the SD card. Okay, let's assign letters. Let's select part 1, list part. Okay, partition 1 is selected. Let's assign letter. In here, I think no space. Yeah, I'm going to put this up further away from the other device I have. I'm going to give it M. And you can format it here, or you can format it in disk part. Let's go ahead and format it. Quick format's done, and it's visible to Windows. Okay, 1 is done, so let's select, excuse me, partition 2, partition 2 is selected, so let's assign letter equals N. And we'll go ahead and let Windows format this also. And there we go. Okay, go back to the folder where you put all your files. For me, it's in downloads, and then also open your SD card. Let's go to File Explorer, and if you did the same as me, M is the first partition on the SD card. N is the second, and that'll be important later, so you'll see why we made 2 later. But anyhow, we want to transfer some files to M. So go back into the folder for the Mini-Mig core, and you want to copy almost everything here. You don't need to copy this RBF, and you don't need to copy the release notes. Otherwise, copy everything else. And go back to your downloads folders, and let's go ahead and copy the Workbench 3.1 install disk. That's just for demonstrating something here. Okay, let's copy. We need a Kickstart image. We need a Kickstart 3.1 image. I recommend the general one that's for, here you have revision 4.0.63. That's probably fine, and that's the generic one for the 500, 600, and 2000. So I can copy that over. Once that's copied over, go ahead and rename that kick.rom. Simply just kick.rom. And then finally, go ahead and copy a single game, just for testing. Not something extremely early, but like an old school game, not for 1000, maybe an old school game for 2000, or excuse me, 1200, 500, something along those lines. And copy. Okay, now let's go ahead and eject the SD card and then move over to the Commodore. Alright, we're back to a real Commodore 64 because that's a lot more fun. Now take your SD card you just prepared and transferred files on and plug it in. And let's turn on. Okay, let's go down to Launch Core, see if everything worked. Minimig AGA. And it's loading. Yeah, there you go. You just booted an Amiga, and it's waiting for some kind of media input. So let's go in. Let's go ahead and load an ADF, which is a disk image. Workbench 3.1 install. And there you go. You have Amiga Workbench. Now let's go ahead and try to launch that game. Select the game, and then reset. If you remember, most early games were disk based and it was disk boot. So let's go ahead and reset. At this point, you can play the game. You can load other games. Okay, that's going to pretty much wrap up part one. At this point, just make yourself familiar with the various settings. The chipset settings, the memory settings, the video settings, so forth. Just make yourself familiar. Maybe load some ADF games, have some fun. And when we get back on part two, we will push it a little further. Thank you again. Like, subscribe, and most important at this point is hit the notification bell so you know when part two has dropped. Thank you. See you on the next.